Hello, everyone. Welcome again back to TASI TV. Today we have a special guest, Loren Lockman. Loren is the founder of the Tanglewood Wellness Center and also more recently Las Cascadas International Community in Costa Rica. So Loren, how long have you been in Costa Rica now?
I am celebrating my 10th year in Costa Rica.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And 17 here in Central America.
17. So you started this Tanglewood Wellness Center in the United States, right? In Maryland?
I did. I started in Maryland. Yep. That was in March. We celebrated our 26th anniversary.
So you've been fasting people for 26 years.
Correct.
Right. And you've had what, thousands of clients?
Many thousands of clients. Yeah.
Yeah.
We currently see about 500 people a year. We used to see more than that.
500 people a year.
I take that back. I'm sorry. That's we're about 300 a year now and that's both here as well as remote fasters.
Right. So the past 2 years, did that make things difficult at all? Did that slack off?
Yeah. Well, back in, 2 years ago in March, Costa Rica closed its borders for 6 months.
Wow.
And so in 6 months' time, we had 3 clients here. Wow. They were people who were already in the country.
Yeah.
And actually that sort of woke me up to the reality that I was depending on government to let people come to us.
Yeah.
And so I did 2 things. I decided that it was time to improve. I'd been working with people remotely, doing this distance fasting. We used to do Skype calls.
Right.
And
right.
I decided to make it a more robust program. And so now we actually recorded a ton of videos. And what happens now is people who work with me remotely, first of all, we do group calls. I do 3 of them every day with up to 6 people on each call. And I have every day you get an email from me as well as access to a daily video, a new video every day, however long your process is.
And this is fasting remotely through Skype. Is that right?
Well, we no longer use Skype. We now do Zoom calls.
Okay, you're doing Zoom. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So that gives you that. Yeah, sure. So you can keep the clientele coming, whether they come to Costa Rica or not. So that makes sense. Also, you started a program, right? A certification program.
That's right. Yeah. At the same time, I mean, this is something that I'd been wanting to do for years. People have been asking me to do for years. It's as you're aware, you could get a pretty full education on my YouTube channel, except that you have to sort of figure out where all the pieces fit and how to, with the logical sequences. We're getting close to 1,000 videos now.
Wow.
So I decided to finally make this a reality, and I asked a student of mine to come up. Fortunately, he was here in time before all this happened. He came in time for the fruit festival, and a week after our annual fruit festival, they closed the borders. So in that 6-month period, we also built a course called Vibrant Health, which we created the Academy for Vibrant Living. Right. And the first course is called Vibrant Health. Again, there was probably 125 videos, something like that. It's a self-paced video course, written material as well.
Yeah.
And then there's a second course, which is the certification course. It's called Health Coach. And you get a third-party certification as a health coach when you complete our course.
Well, that's amazing. So in some ways, it was productive. It was.
Yeah. It was very productive.
Yeah. Sometimes adversity brings good results if you know what to do with it.
I firmly believe that every single thing that occurs provides the seed for growth and benefit. Yeah. And it just depends what we do with it.
Yeah, it just depends on what you do with it. You could sit and twiddle your thumbs and say, oh, why me? Why is this happening?
Exactly.
Or, take action.
Exactly.
You're the person that will always take action. I know that. How did you get into all this? What's your history?
Well, I suspect that my story is probably not that interesting. I'll share it with you, but because it's probably a fairly common one, I think, is a lot of people who wind up following a similar path. I got very sick. I got very sick. I was 6 months out of school at 23. I found myself sicker than anyone I knew, later diagnosed with chronic fatigue syndrome, irritable bowel syndrome, systemic candida, chronic sinusitis, and 57 allergies. And so I didn't know what to do except medicine. I went to conventional medicine and got worse every year for 3 years, taking drugs and following that path. And I finally woke up and thought, these guys really don't have a clue what they're talking about. And that's when I realized, okay, medicine's only suppressing symptoms. I want nothing more to do with this. And I have consumed almost no medical services since then. That was, I had that awakening at 26. I turned 61 yesterday. That was 35 years ago. And I haven't been sick a day. I mean, it took me 6 months from the time I took over, took control of my own health and began fasting and changed my diet. And I haven't been sick a day in 35 years. I broke my hip falling 10 feet onto concrete about 5 years ago, and wound up after 4 nights without sleep. I took 1 ibuprofen so I could get some sleep, and I took one the next night, and then I threw the rest away. Yeah. And those are the only drugs I've taken. And this is crazy, but I think we're around the same age, no?
Yeah, we are. I'll be 61 in September.
Okay, so I've got you by a few months.
Mm-hmm.
Guys our age in the US, on average, take something like 5 medications every day.
My father, he tells these people that he takes aspirin just to get him off his back because he's 88. He takes nothing, and they're just shocked. Like, it's amazing how we've normalized these toxic, poisonous drugs. We've normalized it. And what we've done is, like, what we do is considered extreme. It's just
that's right. It's completely backward. Yeah, it's completely backward, and it's true. I mean, and I'm sure you're aware of the history. I'm not sure how many people are, but it wasn't always this way. I mean, medicine used to be focused on helping people be healthy, get healthy, and stay healthy. But about 95 years ago, the world's first billionaire began investing in pharmaceuticals. And forever changed the course of medical history.
He completely hijacked the medical system.
Exactly.
And it's just unbelievable. And then when the petroleum drugs, John D. Rockefeller, when the petroleum drugs were found to be causing cancer, he started the American Cancer Society to cover that up. So it's so insidious. But this is the background, and this is the history that people should be aware of. I mean, everybody should know this stuff.
Absolutely.
And when you tell them it, they almost think you're a conspiracy theorist. Oh,
well, I'm guessing that most of the people who follow your program probably are already a bit more open-minded than the average person, or they wouldn't be listening to.
Yeah, I've got a good audience.
So I mean, so many people listening may not be shocked to hear us talking about people going weeks without eating. But what most people don't realize is that until Rockefeller rewrote the curricula for medical schools and took over the AMA, the American Medical Association, and completely changed the rules, they used to teach fasting in medical schools.
Yeah, sure. I think the places were called sanitariums where people went to.
That's right.
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
And, you hear people like Herbert Shelton and Arnold Arrett. They used to run places like this where people would get sunshine, fresh air, clean water, proper food. It's completely turned on its head. So back in those days, what guided you to fasting? You found natural hygiene. Did you find it right in the beginning of your search?
Well, not exactly. I mean, what happened was, I found the things that were much more readily available and apparent, including homeopathy, because there were books, and even our little local food co-op had homeopathic remedies, prefabricated homeopathic remedies. I found chiropractic. I found herbs, and I tried all these things, and they didn't help me. And so I reasoned, after medicine failed, I thought, okay, well, maybe I need to go back to nutrition. I'd started studying nutrition somewhere between my 14th and 15th year. I can't remember now exactly when this was, but what had happened was I had grown 10 inches that year, my 14th year, without gaining a pound. Wow. And so I look like a stick with a nose. Mm. And here I am hoping that the girls find me attractive as hormones are kicking in. I look like a stick with a nose. So I thought maybe if I start studying nutrition and begin working out. Maybe I can build some muscle mass. And that got me interested in nutrition. And I was really fascinated by what I was reading and finding. But when I realized, I went back to it all these years later, right? So here it is now, 12 years later, I'm going back to nutrition and thinking, oh, okay, I'm already doing everything conventional nutrition says I should do. And yet I'm sicker than anyone I knew my own age.
That was my, I didn't really get sick, but I started around the same time. I was 15 when I got really interested in nutrition. What I did was I gave up all processed foods. That was my first step.
That was my first step too.
And then when I was around 20, a friend of mine contracted colon cancer, and people were giving him books on macrobiotics, that Japanese method, brown rice.
I do.
I got hardcore into that from him for a few years. And then in the early 80s, actually it was 1984, I don't know if you remember the Mike Douglas show?
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody was on Mike Douglas, and I had a course. I was going to Temple University at the time. And I asked my mother to watch this show. It was actually Harvey Diamond, the Fit for Life book.
Uh-huh.
And I said, I came home, I asked my mom, I said, Mom, what'd you think of it? She thought it was really good. So I bought the book Fit for Life. And, unbeknown to me at the time, that was basically based on natural hygiene.
That's right.
And so that's really what got me into
a slightly watered down version of it, I should say.
It's a watered down version, but it was really for the general public. And
that's right.
It was better than nothing. At least it got people.
It opened a lot of people's eyes. No question.
And it did mine. And then I started to realize that fruit was our natural food. I realized that at that point.
Exactly.
Then I read Gandhi's autobiography, and he was heavily influenced by Herbert Shelton. So
that's right.
He was doing that too. So that was my start, and then I started reading books on natural hygiene. That's really my journey. But it's been a long process. I don't think, for us back then, as for me, probably for you too, I was on my own. Probably you were too.
I was. In fact, I'll tell you just a little bit more. I mean, when I realized that conventional nutrition didn't work, I thought to myself, okay, I mean, nutrition has to be an important factor. How can what we put in our bodies not be important?
Yeah.
So if conventional nutrition doesn't work, maybe it's not the problem is not nutrition, it's the conventional part. So I thought maybe, there's got to be a natural diet for our bodies as there is for every other species. What is that? And I started thinking about that and looking around and doing some reading, and I came across this idea that we're I mean, again, I first gave up processed foods. I later gave up animal products. I was actually at a health conference. I started going to health conferences. I was at a health conference, and I was walking down the sidewalk between two buildings, and I overheard just a tiny snippet of a conversation. One person said to the other one, raw food. And here I was trying to make my diet natural and still cooking every day. And I thought, oh, that's not really natural, is it? Yeah. And that's what woke me up. And it was only, I didn't figure out fruit first. I figured out raw first, and then later realized, why am I eating stuff that doesn't taste good, that's hard to digest? Every species is attracted to their natural diet. But I was actually, my first public lecture, as you may know, I've given lectures in countries all over the world. I'm actually headed off to Eastern Europe in a week or so. And my first one was in a small vegan half raw restaurant in my town that had opened a year earlier. And I'd gotten to know the owners very well. And they said, yeah, we can, we'll book a night that's not so busy, like a Monday night. You can give a talk here. And I think 8 people showed up, and we're all sitting around a big table because it was so small. And I had everyone introduce themselves. And there was a woman, I'll call her Mary. And Mary said, well, I said, why don't you, say what your name is and where you're from and what you do, and a little bit about yourself. This woman, Mary, says, my name is Mary. I'm a natural hygienist. I'd never heard that term, but I assumed it was some sort of a natural health practitioner. And I wasn't nearly as confident then as I am now. I mean, now I've been a health coach for more than 30 years. I've worked with more than 15,000 clients. I have a little bit of comfort with my level of knowledge and experience. Back then, I was not so confident. And so I kept saying, Mary, what do you think? And Mary kept saying, I don't know. And I was thinking to myself, man, for a practitioner, this woman doesn't know anything. But at the end of the talk, and so, I started off with this idea, okay, there's a natural diet for every species, there must be for us too. And then it occurred to me, oh, okay, well, natural species were obviously tropical animals. We can't be anywhere else. What would happen in terms of sleep if I lived in the tropical jungle? How much, what would I do in terms of drinking water? I started asking myself, what would I do if I lived in this environment? And that became sort of what led me to most of the choices I began making and teaching to other people. And so at the end, Mary walks up to me and says, "Are you familiar with the American Natural Hygiene Society?" I said, "No, I've never heard of them. Why?" And she said, "Because they teach a lot of the same things that you're talking about here tonight." And that's when I realized there were other people out there that were kind of in line with my thinking.
Yeah. Eventually you realize it. I think I realized it around 2000. I didn't realize that there were, that's when I realized that there
Oh,
were
wow.
online communities.
Right.
And the
Right.
internet is what brought me into this community, because obviously there's not a lot of people doing what we do.
Right.
So you got into fasting pretty in earnest. I mean, you fasted what, 3 years of your life, something like that?
More than that now. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Cumulatively. Yeah.
Yeah. I got to hand it to you. It's not something that is easy for me to do in this place here,
Right.
with food downstairs. And
Yeah, sure.
and probably I shouldn't go more than 7 days anyway on my own, but that's about all I could do. And
Yeah.
then I start thinking about something to eat. It takes a lot of willpower.
Well, it does. Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the things is, and I think, again, I don't know your entire history. We've known each other online now for what, 10 years, probably at
Yeah, a
least.
long time. Yeah.
But I don't know the whole history. I mean, for me, I got to the point where I spent most of 3 years in bed. I was so exhausted all the time.
That's the thing, right?
I
Because
had strong motivation.
you're so sick that it's either do or die almost, right?
I mean, honestly, if you could have convinced me that eating ceramic cups was going to be my salvation, I probably would have tried it.
And a lot of the people that take this the farthest seem to be the people who have sunk the lowest as far as their health. They just
That's right.
decided that, look, I have to do this. I can't live this way anymore.
Exactly.
I'm
not willing to put up with this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah. Describe briefly the fasting process. What happens when someone fasts? Take it from the moment they stop eating to, I don't know, up to through say a 21-day fast briefly. What are the main kind of points that
Sure.
turning points in the fast?
Okay, so the first thing that occurs is, for the first, say, 6 to 8 hours after eating, if the body needs something, it still looks to the digestive tract. Once it gets past about 6 to 8 hours, whatever's in there is not really going to be very useful anymore. And what the body is typically looking for is sugar, because sugar is our primary fuel, right? And it's important, I think, to understand that we don't run on sugar, we run on electricity, but the body uses sugar to make electricity, basically. So the body is looking for sugar, and once we have depleted whatever sugar's in the digestive tract, we then go to the liver for glycogen reserves. And we also store glycogen. Glycogen is a glucose precursor, which means the body can readily convert it to glucose. It's a storage form of glucose, essentially.
Right.
We also store glycogen in our muscles, but the body tends to leave that alone. And I think the easiest way to understand why that is because if in nature we found ourselves injured or in some situation when there was no food, it would be useful to still have something to power the muscles. A good example is the female polar bear. When she's pregnant, polar bears don't hibernate like some other species of bears do. But the pregnant polar bear will make a den and go down underground for 5 months. She'll birth 2 cubs at a time, and she'll feed them. They're mammals, so she's feeding them her own milk. And all the while, 5 months, she is consuming nothing. No food, no water. When she comes out 5 months later, she's about half the size that she was when she went in, weight-wise. Now, the cubs have been feeding on milk the whole time. They're perfect food. They're fine. But together, they're going to have to hike on average 75 miles before she gets her first meal. Imagine if she had depleted all of her muscle glycogen.
It'd be very difficult.
Right. So our bodies too will maintain the muscle glycogen. You deplete the liver glycogen completely. And once that's happened, and again, I mean, if we think about it from a perspective that the body doesn't really know that we've decided we're not going to eat for 21 days or 26 days or whatever it is.
Right.
It just knows that, hey, there's no fuel coming in. What do we do now? Where do we get what we need? So once we've depleted the liver glycogen, at this point, we're typically going to be 18 to 24 hours into the process, 16, perhaps 24 hours into the process. At this point, the body is still looking for sugar. So what it does, and this surprises a lot of people, but what it will do is it will then begin converting small amounts of muscle to sugar. And people say, why would it do that when we store fat? For the specific purpose of having fuel when we need it. And that's absolutely true. The reason why, I guess, is because it's easier to continue using sugar than to convert to a different fuel. And the body doesn't know. Maybe you're going to find a meal in an hour.
Yeah.
It's just going to take a tiny bit today, right now, and a tiny bit in an hour.
It doesn't want to go to ketosis right away. It figures, let's try this first. And if then nothing comes in, then after that, then it's ketosis, right?
That's right. It's got this backup system. It's a whole different system. It's got this backup it can go to if it needs to. But it will typically take most people about 3 days or so for the body to say, okay, you know what? Now it's time to start using the fat that we have.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, there'll be tiny amounts of fat consumption the first 3 days, and then fat consumption begins to ramp up while muscle consumption begins to go down. Now, we never completely stop using muscle. And the reason why is there is precious little sugar available from fat metabolism. But the brain, the reproductive organs, and the spleen all require sugar.
They can't use ketones?
They don't use ketones. Everything else in the body runs on ketones. Those organs and systems are still looking for sugar. And so the body continues to convert a tiny amount of muscle every day into sugar in order to provide those systems with what they need. By the time we're 10 to 11 days into the process, we're running almost exclusively on fat with a tiny amount of sugar being converted every day. And that will continue. It will continue that way until we deplete our fat reserves. Now, most of the people that I work with have nothing to worry about. I mean, most people today have a 6 to 8 week reserve of body fat. And that doesn't mean they die at 6 to 8 weeks. It means that's when they begin starving. Right. And by the way, I mean, the difference between, it's interesting because in the scientific literature, in medicine, they confuse these two terms, fasting and starving.
They think if you haven't eaten for a couple of days, you're starving.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, most people think if they haven't eaten for a few hours, they're starving.
Yeah.
People literally say that all the time. I'm starving.
I know, I'm starving.
I haven't eaten in 5 hours, right?
I know, I'm starving.
As you're probably aware, the 2016 Nobel Prize for Medicine was won by Japanese PhD Yoshinori Osumi for his 25 or so years worth of work around autophagy. And in the publications in his papers, it says that autophagy happens much more efficiently and effectively in starvation.
He means fasting. He
means without food.
Yeah, without food. Now, autophagy, when is that starting? Does that start, fairly soon? Does that start after maybe 24 hours or even 20 hours? Or is...
Well, there's a little bit of controversy around this because some people say it doesn't really kick in until you are 24 hours or more into the process. I would suggest that to some extent it's always going on. How much of it's
right? It would have to
all the time. How much of it's going on depends on what else your body is tasked with doing. So, for instance, if this is you, you're probably not going to hear this transmission. But if you're one of those people that is every day going to McDonald's 3 times a day, and eating tons of processed crap, your body probably doesn't have much ability to do much autophagy.
It's so overburdened, which the average
Exactly.
person is overburdened. That's why they have to get these severe colds and flus and illnesses and diseases
Exactly.
because the overburdened body.
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Constantly
In fact,
consuming, not giving much time for assimilation, and more especially elimination, which is
that's right.
probably, well, it's is easily as important as the other two.
Oh, no question. In some ways, perhaps. I mean, it's hard to say more important because obviously we need to assimilate nutrients.
Yeah.
We need all these things, but we have to get the garbage out, and that's where most bodies aren't doing a very good job. It's interesting. I mean, not only I think a lot of people really underestimate the extent of the problem, but recent studies show that the average North American now gets well over 60%. I think it was closer to 65% of their calories from ultra processed foods.
Oh, that's just awful. And, I believe this is by design. I really do. I think that, at the top of this insidious control pyramid, they want us to be sick. They want us to be stupid, and they want us addicted to their pharmaceutical drugs. This is why
Absolutely.
it's so normalized. And it's just
absolutely. This was always the plan. I think it's the reason why, if we investigated, I guarantee you that the big pharma controls medicine at every level, including medical schools and their curricula, because even today, the way this works is simple. They go to the medical school and say, we have a $300,000 grant for you, and we'd like you to consider changing the way you talk about whatever.
absolutely
Fill in the blank.
well,
And they say, listen, of course it's up to you. You can do whatever you like. If you don't want to change the way you teach that, I'm sure there's another school that'd be happy to have the $300,000.
absolutely. Well, that's what Rockefeller did, 100 years ago.
Exactly.
And doctors are financially incentivized to prescribe certain drugs. And yeah, it's, oh, well, and the TV networks, at least in America, are controlled by a big pharma because they
Absolutely.
put all these ads on the TV. So much of the revenue from these TV networks are coming from big pharma.
Years and years ago, before I had my awakening around all of this, I actually dated briefly a woman who was a pharmaceutical rep. And there was, at the time, this probably would have been the late 80s, early 90s, there was a huge, it was like a huge news item because the pharmaceutical companies were getting their hands slapped because they were outright bribing with new cars and fancy vacations, et cetera, doctors to write prescriptions. And so it became illegal for them to do, or maybe it already was, but now they still do it.
I know.
It's just a little bit more hidden from view.
Yeah, I
Still
mean,
happening.
I dated someone years ago who was a rep for a pharmaceutical company, and my cousin is a doctor, so I know. Well, yeah, there's so much money in it. Big pharma is $1.3 trillion industry, so
Right.
they control everything. So you've talked before about the 10th or 11th day being the deepest part of the process. Is that because of the ketosis? You're in such deep ketosis?
Yes, exactly. I mean, the idea is simply that so our bodies attempt to store as much of the toxic garbage in body fat as possible because that's the safest place. What they don't want to do is have those toxins stored in organs or muscle tissue. So the body attempts to store as much as it can. Now, and unfortunately, there may well be toxins throughout our organs, in our brains, everywhere in the body, but the body's doing its best to store as much as it can, as much of it as it can in fatty tissue. And so when we get to the point where we're consuming the most fatty tissue, that seems to me to be the most profound phase of the process, which begins at day 10 or 11. We now have the ability to eliminate that stuff as quickly as possible. But I think before you jump, I think it's important to point out that it's not simply being in ketosis. That's the issue. Because if that were the case, we could just eat a ketogenic diet. or we could
Sure.
dry fast,
Sure.
which puts most people directly into ketosis.
It has to be, you have to remove all the food so that the body is not expending energy in digestion.
Right.
Yeah.
That's right. And again, I mean, with dry fasting does that.
Yeah,
Dry
sure.
fasting puts people into ketosis right away because they're already severely dehydrated bodies, in most cases, are desperately seeking water. And they get that water primarily from metabolizing fat. And so if a body is is so desperately seeking water, it needs that water to stay alive, I don't think it's doing a lot of cleansing and healing.
Yeah. And, speaking of dry fasting, it looks like someone else in the community just died in the past few months
Yes.
and I looked at her Facebook profile and there was dry fasting in there.
Yeah.
And there was also these liver cleanses in there, where you drink copious amounts of oil. And this is why, I want to do this type of interview and have you on, because this stuff is madness. And with the dry fasting, in the past few years, I'm always wondering who's going to be next because it's so risky. It's so dangerous.
It's incredibly dangerous. Yeah. And it's all based on nonsense. And there's no science to support any of the claims that these people make. I felt particularly sad. I mean, I felt sad whenever anyone dies as a result of these ridiculous practices. Robert Lockhart was an amazing guy. This whole thing took him down. And the woman you're talking about, I guided her through her first long fast.
Did you really?
Remotely, many years ago. But like a lot of people, she was always looking for magic bullets.
Yeah, no, I know. And then they follow certain people who are questionable. I called one of them a charlatan on my channel. I'm pretty outspoken, I'm not necessarily a real nice person, but I like to speak the truth because the truth is not going to always be so nice, is it?
Yeah.
No. But, it's my channel and I'm not trying to criticize people, but people really need to realize, what's going on here. Because
I think honestly, Mark, I think the most important thing is to be honest.
Yeah. Sure.
That's more important than being nice.
Yeah.
I think in every moment I attempt to be as kind and loving as I can be. And sometimes I do a much better job than other times. I'm not always capable of doing it.
The thing about it is the truth is really the most kind thing we could do. I mean,
exactly.
But the thing is, it's not going to be so well received, but hey, these things, people are dry fasting, drinking the olive oil and taking all these herbs and, it's, it's not sound practice. So you mentioned that 21 days is ideal, at least 21 days. That's because you're in the deepest part of the process for what, 11 days? Is that the reason?
Well, let me clarify. First of all, 21 isn't a magic number, but this is sort of, what I talk about. Of course, everything is based on our own history, our own experience.
Yeah, sure.
And as you may recall, I spent 10 or 11 years in the commercial real estate industry, brokering financing. And I had a client who developed hotels, and I wound up financing 5 or 6 hotels. So I learned a little about the hotel business because I had to put together a package of information and take it to potential lenders. They're mostly insurance companies, pension funds that had all the money in the world to lend to the developers. And what I learned was about something called structural vacancy. So you're in a hotel room, you're leaving on a Tuesday, the next guy wants to come in on Thursday. They can't fill those 2 nights. There's nothing they can. I mean, if you're at Disney World, every night's full, but most hotels don't have that advantage. And so I decided some years back in running Tanglewood that we would eliminate the possibility for structural vacancy. And we did that by having our clients come from Saturday to Saturday, 1, 2, 3, up to 10 weeks. That means we can be 100% full. We don't have those 2-day holes because we're always full. And so because we do that, we then back into it. If you're here for a week, you can fast 5 days and refeed for 2. Now, most of our guests are here for 4, 5, 6 weeks and often more. And so with a 4-week stay, you can fast 21 days and have 7 days of refeeding. I simply found over time that works for almost everyone. Most people don't need more refeeding time after a 21-day fast, the way that we
Right.
do it here.
Right.
So it's not that 21 days is the best number. 21 days is actually the minimum I recommend for most people.
That's what I mean. Minimum. Sure.
Yeah,
Minimum.
exactly. Yeah. With some conditions, I had at the lecture today, one of my guests said, can we talk about multiple sclerosis? I've got a friend with MS. Sure. So with MS, for instance, I would normally recommend 26 to 30 days fasting. It depends
Right.
on what the situation is. It would depend on each person's specific condition.
And something like Lyme is probably going to be 30 days. Am I correct in saying that?
We've actually had some people do well with 21, but I generally would recommend 26 to 30 as well with
And
Lyme disease.
something like a bowel issue, like irritable bowel syndrome, probably what, 4 weeks for that?
Again, yeah, I mean, 4 weeks fasting, 26 to 30 days works pretty well for most lower GI tract issues. We have amazing, it's surprising because it's one of the biggest killers, but hypertension, we have 100% success with 21
That
days.
drops pretty much almost immediately, doesn't it?
Almost immediately.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with older people who have enough plaque in the arteries, as the body breaks down the plaque and the blood becomes thicker, their pressure typically goes up. And it may take a week or a little more to come back to where it's lower than where it started. But by the end of the refeeding process, with a 21-day fast, a 4-week process, we've had 100% success. We had one guy. I should say, to be 100% honest, transparent. We had one client in his late 70s who started with blood pressure of 176 over I forget what, and when he finished, it was 126. So it was still 6 points above normal. But we eliminated statistically 100% of the risk.
Yeah, still a dramatic reduction.
Dramatic reduction. Type 2 diabetes, same thing. 100% success with 21 days fasting and 7 days refeeding. Easy. That's relatively easy.
Type 1, can they fast? Can type 1 diabetes?
They can. They can fast. We fasted quite a few of them. We, as I'm sure you're aware, and many people listening may be aware, I mean, I've got plenty of haters out there. There's lots of trolls. And we had a client way back, this would have been 18, 19 years ago, a young woman, early 20s, type 1 diabetic, who wound up overdosing on her own insulin because she was taking the prescription incorrectly. There's, for people that don't know, type 1 diabetics usually take a fast and a slow-acting insulin. The slow-acting acts as a baseline to maintain, to try to sort of keep level blood sugar. And then when they eat something, they take the fast-acting insulin to counterbalance the fact that sugar is coming into the system. She had her blood sugar gone up, and she wound up taking the slow-acting insulin over and over again. And over the course of 5 or 6 hours, she'd taken it like 5 times. Finally, it started to kick in, and there was way too much insulin in her system. So heart stopped. We actually got that going again, got her to the hospital, and she died a few days later. People say, see, you can't fast type 1 diabetics. No, that's not true. You just have to be careful about what you do. We've probably fasted 25 more since then, including the woman who's been doing all my videos for the last 4 years. She just completed her 4th fast with me. And this one, for the first time, 26 days, she needed no insulin whatsoever while fasting. Now, she continued monitoring it throughout the day.
Yeah, sure, amazing.
And here's the crazy thing. When she began refeeding, and it usually is only in the refeeding that people are moving out the mucoid plaque, the really old, hard waste. Even after a few fasts, she still had some of the stuff in her body at 35. Mm-hmm. So when she began moving that stuff out, we didn't know this is what it was. But when that stuff started moving, we started seeing really erratic blood sugar. It was going way high, then going low, and it was crazy. And again, it can be managed, right? It's not a problem as long as you manage it. Once she'd had most of that stuff out, she went back to taking the same amount of slow-acting baseline insulin every night before she went to bed, except she woke up the next morning and her blood sugar was super low. So she dropped that amount of insulin the next night. It was super low again the next day, dropped it again, super low the next day, dropped it again. I finally said to her, maybe you don't need that anymore. And she now, for the last 3 or 4 weeks, for the first time in 5 years, she's been taking insulin for 5 years or so. She needs no slow-acting insulin at night whatsoever. She wakes up with excellent blood sugar almost every morning.
And this is while she's eating, right?
While she's eating and eating only fruit.
Wow. And
She
so she takes the fast acting insulin though, still?
she still takes. So they recommend that, medicine recommends that you take about equal amounts. She now takes the slow acting stuff only in the morning, only during the
Okay.
day,
Hmm.
because what she doesn't want is for it to kick in while she's asleep and get her take her blood sugar down so far that it
Right.
kills her.
Right.
So,
Right.
but she was already using much less insulin than the average person. Now she's using even less.
That's amazing. Well, Robbie Barbaro is a type 1 diabetic, and he's
Yeah,
doing really well with his type 1 diabetes on this type of diet, a fruit diet,
exactly. Yeah.
which people don't understand diabetes. They don't realize it's a disease of fat toxicity. It doesn't really have to do with sugar.
Well, I mean,
Of course, type 1 is that's a different thing. That's a different situation. It's harder to overcome.
it's hard to overcome because it's usually inherited and usually means that the pancreas simply isn't producing the insulin that's
Right.
necessary.
Right.
And of course, if you're living on chocolate fudge, you're going to need a lot more insulin than if you're living on something that doesn't contain any sugar. But it's not just diabetes that people don't understand. Most people don't understand fruit. Most people think, I mean, doctors still tell people if you're diabetic, you can't eat fruit. You have to severely limit your fruit
I know.
because they don't understand that it's not about the fact that fruit contains sugar or even fructose. Again, people think fructose is a bad thing. It's not. There's nothing wrong with fructose. The problem is we were never meant to eat it in isolation.
Right. Right.
It needs to come in the original package with all the fiber and water that came in the fruit. Then you're perfectly fine.
Yeah.
So what people fail to understand about fruit is that fruit, because of the fiber and water, actually has a low glycemic load. It doesn't have much impact on blood sugar.
Right. Right. It's when you dry it or take juice, then it starts to have a higher glycemic load.
Exactly. Well, juices, and this is important because there's a lot of people listening that are gonna tune this part out on purpose, right? Subconsciously. Folks, you got to understand, we can't improve on nature. The original package is perfect. If you eat an orange, you've got a glycemic load of around 4. And that's 0 to 9 means low glycemic load. 10 to 19 is moderate. 20 and above is high. When you juice the orange and drink the orange juice, you've got 3 times the glycemic load. I've got some help here now. This is chai. You triple the glycemic load when you juice fruit or carrots or beets.
Sure.
And so this means a lot more work for the body. A lot more insulin necessary, which can potentially damage the body if it's not managed very well. And so there's really no argument. Fruit juice, carrot juice tastes good because it's got a lot of sugar, but it's not something you want to be trying to live on. It should be an occasional thing.
And that's another thing that we see people doing these juice diets for weeks on end, which I'm opposed to, but there are some people out there promoting that, which have a bigger following and influence than I do.
Mark, that seems impossible. Actually,
there's some cult figures out there, Loren.
There's a guy on Instagram who's got a pretty big following, and he's called Jeff Juices.
Yeah.
And on Saturday, he completes his second fast with me. And what's cool? Okay. I mean, I love this guy. I never knew him. I didn't know who he was when he registered to fast. He got here and people were like, that's Jeff Juices. I'm like, who's that? Anything about it? I don't have time to watch most people on social media. But what I love about Jeff is he's completely honest. So he's now telling people, you should go to Tanglewood and fast. It's much better than he gets paid to guide people through juice fasts. Mm-hmm. But he's telling everyone water only fasting is much more powerful and beneficial. If you're not willing to do that or don't think you can, sure, I can help you here, but you should go to Tanglewood.
It's not only more powerful, but it's more natural. I mean, the juices really aren't natural.
No, that's right. That's right.
They're processed just like cooked food is processed.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. I mean, I know we're in agreement on this and many things. Obviously, a lot of people don't get this, and I think really don't want to get it. There's this mystique, this myth that people think, this idea that juices are better than whole foods. better than
Yeah,
whole foods.
because you
You
can
know, and
get more in, like there's more, bang for the ounce.
well, I'm going to
Uh,
share two pieces on that, if I may. The first one is, I like to ask people, um, can we agree? I think you and I can agree that apples and oranges and papayas and watermelons and mangoes and pineapples, these are all perfect foods to the human body. Okay. So my question is always, how do we improve on perfection?
certainly not
it.
with a machine,
Well, it's impossible by definition to
Yeah,
improve on perfection.
that's right. That's
Perfect
right.
means you can't do better than that. And
Yeah.
these foods are perfect. And as soon as we put them through a machine, we're not getting something better. We're getting something inferior.
That's right.
And the other
That's
piece,
right.
I have a story that I've been telling for years. You've probably heard me talk about this. I had just completed a lecture outside of Washington, D.C. And a woman approached me, asked me some questions. I answered her questions, and I said to her, "You drink a lot of carrot juice, don't you?" And she said, "Yeah, how'd you know?" And I said, "Well, you're
Yeah.
orange.
Yeah.
You're orange."
Yeah.
Her skin was bright orange. And she
Mhm.
said, "Oh, that's because I'm detoxifying." And I said, "I don't know. I run the world's largest dedicated water-only fasting center, the most powerful way to detoxify your body. No one's ever turned orange.
Yeah. Yeah.
Turning orange is not evidence that you're detoxifying."
She's overloaded on, what do they call it? Carotenoids.
Yeah,
Basically.
exactly. Yeah, her liver wasn't capable of processing all of that.
Yeah.
How can that be beneficial?
Sure. It's
It makes no
yeah.
sense.
Nature is perfect. It's already worked out. We can't improve on it.
Exactly.
And that's the whole beauty of natural hygiene. It doesn't try to improve on it.
Well, as yes, I mean, it's funny. I had somebody recently in one of the Spanish groups, or maybe it was actually on one of my Spanish lives. Every Saturday morning, 9 a.m., I'm live in Spanish. Friday mornings live in English
Right.
on YouTube and Instagram. And someone said, a hygienist here in Chile says we shouldn't fast. I said, that person's not a hygienist. I mean, if they're telling you not to fast, they clearly don't really understand hygiene. And the problem is, there's a lot of people out there. There's a guy out there who, he hates me. And one of the problems is he got kicked off of several hygiene-based Facebook groups because he was promoting a bunch of non-hygienic nonsense. We kept saying to him, this isn't hygiene. You can't do that here.
Yeah.
Believe whatever you want, but not here on this page.
Yeah. One more question, and then I'm going to let you go. Hydration. Okay. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I've come to believe that hydration is probably the single most important factor that we can measure. That we've always said. I mean, people have said for years, water is life, and it's true. Nothing happens without sufficient water in our bodies. Almost nothing happens without water. We were talking earlier about the foolishness of dry fasting. Why these people have died. I recently fasted a fairly well-known alternative MD. This is an MD, by the way. What I mean by this, an MD who realized that medicine was nonsense and now practices alternative medicine, although he has an MD license. And he said to me, when we talked about this, he said, one of the first things they taught us in medical school is that when you're dehydrated, you are damaging your kidneys.
Mm-hmm. And that's what people are doing when they dry fast. And this is what can happen: renal failure. And if that happens, it's a crapshoot at that point.
Well, yeah. I mean, if you're lucky, they catch you in time and get you on a machine. You might be okay. You're going to be on a dialysis machine the rest of your life. In most cases, I mean, in fact, this is sad, and I appreciate the awakening that happened. But I had a client 3 years ago who fasted with me remotely, had an amazing process. He was a competitive tennis player and a law student in Europe. And it was an amazing process for him. About a year later, he comes back to me and says, okay, I'm ready to fast again. And we got him registered and all set to go. And I think the day before we started, he said, by the way, he said, I disagree with you about some of the stuff about how much water we need. And he said, I'm just going to drink when I'm thirsty, if that's okay with you. I said, no, definitely not okay with me. If I'm guiding you through the fast, you have to take my coaching around this. And he said, oh, I know, I want to do it my way. So, okay. Gave him a refund. Told him, good luck. I can't work with you if you're not going to be taking coaching.
Yeah.
He reached out to me a few months later and told me he wound up in the hospital with 35% kidney function at the age of 22.
That's just
Because
Terrible.
and he wasn't dry fasting. I mean, he did 21 days, but he was drinking significantly less water than he actually needed.
He probably wasn't getting a thirst signal for thirst because he was so dehydrated.
That's right. I mean, what people fail to realize is that we lose touch with this mechanism. It's common. I mean, people are aware of this, and typically the older we get, the more dehydrated we get, the less in touch with it we are. So people come to me all the time and they say, well, I normally just drink when I'm thirsty. I'll say, well, how's that work for you so far? We just measure your hydration level and it's not very good. Why is it all of a sudden going to start working for you if it hasn't worked until now? So hydration really is critically important. And it's one of the things that differentiates Tanglewood, I think, from anywhere else. Because if you go to True North in California, they'll tell you not to drink more than 2 liters a day.
Really?
And
That's not enough. That's not enough.
No, it's not. I have an old acquaintance. I consider him a good friend, a great guy, who worked for 9 years as an MD supervising fast at True North. You probably know who I'm talking about. And we were co-keynote speakers at a big event in Tel Aviv 2.5 years ago. And I saw him 18 months ago last, when I was in South Florida. He lives there. And I spent the afternoon hanging out with him at his house. He doesn't believe mucoid plaque exists after 9 years.
Oh, I know. I've heard him speak about it. About it.
Yeah. Well, that's because nobody at True North ever eliminates this stuff.
They don't drink enough water, probably, right?
They don't drink enough water. They don't rest enough. They keep them busy. They keep them occupied. There are flat screen TVs in every room. There's Wi-Fi. There's events all day long downstairs. They're going up and down the stairs because there's no elevators. Here I've got one set of stairs here, and I tell people you probably don't want to take those stairs until you're not fasting. Just rest as much as you can. My clients are drinking a lot more water, and they're fasting much longer. Those are the 3 issues. They don't fast long enough.
Yeah. Because that stuff is so hard and dry, it needs all the body's resources, right, to hydrate it and move it out.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And it's life-changing. It's game-changing.
I'm sure it is.
I had a client about a year or so ago, 18 months ago, maybe. He was fasting with me at 40, 45-ish. He was fasting with me because he had these occasional migraines that put him completely out of commission. He would have to go into a dark room for 3 days, couldn't talk to anyone, couldn't do anything. It was in so much pain. And he completed his 30-day fast. He was on I can't remember if it was the 5th or the 6th morning of the refeeding process. Morning for me. He was in the UK working with me remotely. And he tells me on our call that day, said, last night, I had the worst migraine I've ever had in my life. And then I had a bowel movement and it immediately disappeared. Big, hard, old bowel movement.
Sure.
Immediately disappeared.
Because that, when it's in you still and when it's loosened up, those toxins are probably getting back into the system.
You're reabsorbing the stuff into the bloodstream.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And when you get that stuff out is when you can really hydrate, right? Because the body is trying to move it out while you're not fasting. So
exactly.
it's becoming a sponge or for.
That's exactly right. I talk about it like it's this, that you have this giant sponge of old hard material in there. Right. It becomes impossible to get hydrated no matter what you do. Impossible. And just to give people just a sense of the impact, we see people here whose lean hydration level, well, their overall hydration level, which is the same as the lean, just expressed differently, is as low as 70% when it should be 100%, which means if we're measuring it correctly, they are 30 points lower than they should be.
So the hydration on your machine should be 100%. Is that what you're saying?
Well, what the machine gives us is simply the percentage of mass, which is water. Mm-hmm. And that's never going to be 100%. I'd have pushed it in a cup like this if you were 100%.
Yeah.
Right. But the reason why it can be quite low and you can still be hydrated is because body fat contains only about 10% water. So we had a client 2 years ago who was 5'2", 250 pounds.
Oh, man.
That person's water, her body was like 75% water, which means 75% fat, which means the percentage of her mass, which is water, was exceptionally low. But that didn't mean that she was dehydrated. As long as her lean tissue had enough water in it, that's okay. I mean, obviously being that big is not okay, but you can't tell. That's the problem with bioimpedance devices. They're only going to tell you what percentage of your mass is water. And then they're going to say that's good or not good. It's not really very useful.
So you have to interpret it then.
That's right. I worked out a formula a couple times where I fixed it I thought I did a couple of years ago. There's still some issues with it. It's the problem is that we have to make a couple of assumptions because there's information we don't have. Again, body fat theoretically is 10% water, but we don't actually know if your body fat today is 10% water, or maybe that varies too. And we have no way to measure that. We also have no way to measure how much of the water in your body is extracellular water, because that's not hydrating you. And so, for instance, you're familiar with cystic fibrosis?
Yeah.
For anyone who's not, cystic fibrosis is an inherited condition where the body produces excessive mucus. Most people drown in their own mucus before they're 40.
Wow.
No one survives this, and most people don't live to 40. They wind up filling up their lungs, their heart with mucus. And so we had a young man here who was around 38 with cystic fibrosis, and the machine, the formula based on the readings from the machines was telling us that he was about 110% hydrated. That's pretty hard to do.
Yeah, sure.
You can't be better than fully hydrated
because of all the mucus.
The mucus is mostly water, and the machine's going to read that as water. Same thing is true with edema in the body. If you're, as you know, because your body is very clean, you've been eating a very clean diet now for a long time. If you go to a raw vegan restaurant, eat something with salt in it, you might have some extra water around your ankles the next day.
Yeah.
Right.
Sure. I'll blow up. Sure. Yeah.
Sure. And again, the cleaner the body is, the more the effect is going to be. So that edema is water in the body, and the machine can't differentiate between cellular water and extracellular water.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true if you've got inflammation. Let's say you injure your knee and your knee swells up. Again, the machine's going to see all that liquid and say, "Oh, you're better hydrated." Not really.
Yeah.
It's not hydrating you. It's a good thing. It's there for a reason, but it's not increasing your hydration level. So we have to interpret these things, and that means there can be some issues.
Right.
But yes, we've worked out a way to calculate. And the reason this is so important, I mean, again, to come back to the importance of hydration, science says if your brain is 2% dehydrated, 2%, you lose 20% cognitive function, decreases 20%.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
For the essential organs, this stuff is so critical for the blood, the brain.
Exactly.
pH of the blood, for instance, it has to be within a very small,
very narrow range.
Yeah.
That's right. That's right. Exactly.
And that's just amazing. And the body will do anything to keep it there, which causes so many problems for people because of their acidic diet. Their bones get brittle, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. In fact, to restate what you've just said, so everyone's clear about this, the body creates osteoporosis on purpose because the alternative is death.
That's right. The blood is more important than the bones, basically.
I like to talk about it this way just for fun. Your blood pH should be between 7.35 and 7.45. And if it moves too far in that range, there's this condition that develops. Oh yeah, death, right? It kills you. And so your body, if it has to give up some calcium and other minerals, and it does that because those are alkaline minerals to reduce increase the pH, bring the pH back up. That's a lot more important than keeping your bones intact and being dead with great bones.
Unfortunately, the standard modern diet is acidic, everything. They're not eating anything that's alkalizing. So,
well, again, the recent studies say 65% of calories from ultra processed foods, over 31% from animal products. So animal products and all processed foods are acid forming. Yeah. And the average person is getting like 97% of their calories from these two things.
Even if people eat a whole food vegan diet, they're still eating more acid forming foods than they should. The grains.
That's right. Exactly. Grains,
it's probably
beans.
Not as bad, but grains.
No, it's certainly not as bad.
Yeah.
Certainly not as
Yeah.
bad. Yeah, it's
Mhm.
definitely an improvement. It's not a big enough improvement to have a significant impact on health for most
Right.
people.
Well, the thing is, once you get clean and once I started going back to doing this time restricted eating or intermittent fasting just because
Mhm.
the less I eat, the better I feel. I'm giving my body time to assimilate and eliminate. And it's just
Right.
amazing. We're all basically, I don't want to say all, but people are eating too much. That's really the problem. Like you said, if you go back to the forest, you got to climb that tree to get that fruit. And then after that fruit tree is done, you got to go find another one. We're not
That's
doing
right.
that now, right? We just go to the supermarket, stock it up, and then open the refrigerator the middle of the night. We wouldn't be eating in the middle of the night in the forest. It'd be pitch black.
That's right. Yeah. I apologize in advance for the fact that I'm about to be a bit crass here, but a lot of people couldn't get their fat ass up into the tree.
Hey, I know. That's another problem. That's
Yeah.
another problem. So we've lost our true nature. We've been domesticated. We've been, we could talk forever. We could talk a long time about how this occurred after we migrated out of our natural habitat.
Right.
But we know what happened over the centuries. And then these things are addicting too. And that's another thing that people have to contend with.
Absolutely. Yeah. And don't think these big food processors didn't figure out a long time ago how to make the stuff more addictive.
Salt and fat, basically, and sugar too.
Yeah, and I suspect they're adding other chemicals in as well. That
probably, yeah.
Sure. in the same way that cigarette manufacturers a long time ago figured out they could add nicotine to the cigarettes, make them even more addictive.
Yeah, get people
again. It's all these big industries, starting with medicine. Medicine. It's so sad how many people think that medicine is there to help them. The bottom line is medicine is a for-profit industry intended to take care of its own bottom line. And people like you and me don't consume medicine. We're not putting any money in their pockets. They don't want people to be healthy. No. They want people to stay sick, not dead, because dead people don't buy drugs either, but they want people to stay sick. That's the objective.
Well, I'm not going to say the word, so because I want to put this on YouTube. And if I say this word, it's not going to.
I know where you're going.
This here, 5 billion people now.
Yeah.
And this is a modern tragedy.
Yeah.
But that's the conditioning. That's the indoctrination that everybody goes through. Even me, I went through it as a kid. So.
Yeah, of course. So did I. And by the way, for anyone here who's still not on the same line as Mark, who doesn't understand what he just said or doesn't agree, perhaps, do the research. There's zero science to support the idea that thing has ever helped anyone.
Never. Not in the history, not in the history of them, which started about 200 years ago, actually, the first one. Then Pasteur started making his concoctions. And then after Rockefeller took over the medical system, then it just got really bad. Now we have kids, by the time they're 18, 72 of these toxic things.
Right. You and I got what, maybe 8, 10?
I don't know if did we get that many? I thought it was.
No, I think it might have been. There were some things that had to be repeated, but I think there might have been maybe 8 of them by 18.
Okay, well,
something like that.
Yeah.
I may be wrong.
Not nearly as bad as what's happening.
No, exactly. I think the average baby gets something like 20 in the first 20 hours of life.
Just absolute madness. And they've got people thinking that unless you do this, your baby's going to die of this or that, or
right,
or is liable to, put it that way.
Right. Likely to. Yeah.
Okay, Loren. This has been great.
My pleasure.
I got a whole bunch of questions here, but we can go on all night. Oh, there it is.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, let's do it again sometime.
Yeah, we could do a part 2 another time and get through more stuff because there's really so much to talk about. But I like to keep these things to about an hour. And
sure. My pleasure.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I really appreciate it. And I'll see you online on Friday mornings. I like to pop on every now and then.
Good. I'll see you then.
Okay.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Bye.